Lost was a TV show that ran between 2004 and 2010 on ABC for a total of 6 seasons. It was a sleeper hit that had captured the attention of the world for most of its run. The show was about a group of more or less strangers that had somehow survived the crash of Flight 815 on what appeared to be a deserted island. Over the course of the next 6 seasons, the show went through many changes and went into drastically different plot lines. There was a group of mysterious people called the Others, polar bears, ancient temples, smoke monsters, a 4-toed statue, and of course my favorite, time-traveling bunnies. I'm not kidding. There hadn't been a show since Twin Peaks or The X-Files that had really captured the world's attention. And when Lost came onto the scene, much like Twin Peaks, it changed television. Even to this day, Lost has changed TV, for the better and of course for the worse. In the wake of Lost, there were a massive amounts of shows just trying to capture that lightning in a bottle that Lost had been so successful with. Shows like Heroes, Fast Forward, Persons Unknown, Jericho, Wayward Pines, Once Upon a Time, the list goes on. Shows with heavy lore and overarching mysteries. But no show on this list had ever been as successful as Lost at keeping the viewer's attention. Lost was created by J.J. Abrams and David Lindoff. They both worked on the pilot together. And going forward, the head writers were Carlton Cuse and David Lindoff himself. The two were everywhere for a time, on podcasts or whatever podcasts were called before they were called podcasts. I think they were just called podcasts, television interviews, conventions, and the duo did everything possible to feed the viewers with clues and hints and the promise of answers by the end of the show. And then Lost aired its final episode. They took a lot of heat from people who weren't happy with the seemingly lack of answers. But as this video goes on, I hope to change some hearts and minds on the subject. The two showrunners had taken so much heat that for some time they had to go off the grid and allow the heat to die down a little bit. That is until the Game of Thrones series finale aired and, well, D&D took the mantle from Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof. I only mention Cuse and Lindelof here, but don't expect me to bring them up much in this video. I don't dislike them or their writing style, but for this video and my thoughts, they aren't going to be needed as much, more than a few times that they will be mentioned. First, I would like to talk to you a little bit about my connection to the show. I wanted to share a few things about me from all the way back then, before moving on with the rest of the video. See, I do indeed have a connection with Lost, because much like the characters on the show, when I first started watching Lost, I was utterly broken. My stepbrother had just taken his life in 2007, and it shook me to the fiber of my being. At my very core, I didn't know what to do. I had been struggling with a drug addiction problem, one that I have put behind me for the last 7 years now. I was committing self-harm, and I was in and out of hospitals constantly. At the time, I had this horrific fear of being alone. I just couldn't be alone for any more than a couple of moments. I even recall now that when my wife used to go to work at the local Starbucks, I would sit in the cafe. I would watch TV on my computer, and I would write while she was working. I'd do anything possible so I didn't have to be alone. This is where I started watching Lost on iTunes for $1.99 an episode. And I found a connection with the show. There were characters that I connected with. There were themes that made me think. And believe it or not, it even helped me process the random loss of my brother. I grew while I watched this show. But now in 2021, the past couple of months have been very hard for me. This has been a return to one of my most darkest times. It's been a very bleak time for me. And so, I went back to a place that has brought me comfort. I started rewatching Lost again from the beginning. And after the first season, I wanted to share this. I wanted to share my thoughts with people. Even if no one watched this video, I wanted to get it out of my system once and for all. For the past couple of months, I've been working on this project while fighting my disabilities, struggling at home, and my growing depression. But I hope that by the end of this video, you can see just how much this show means to me and how special I think Lost is. From here, we're going to break down this video into a few sections. Before going into the characters or answering any questions or plot holes that were presented, I think we're going to need a little context from here. So, the first section of this video is going to cover the first 6 seasons of Lost. I'm just going to give a very short and convoluted rundown of the plot lines from each season. From there, we're going to go into a list of characters. Now, Lost had a massive cast. It was an ensemble show. And frankly, to talk about every character would keep me here even longer than I planned to. So we're just going to talk about my favorite characters. In no real order, or maybe there's going to be an order. I don't know, I'm just making all this up as we go. Then once we have all the context needed, I'm going to give you my ideas. And I'm going to answer some of the show's plot holes. And then wrap it up with an overall meaning to what I think the last 6 seasons were about. The last thing that I would like to say before moving on to the summary is that if my rundown of the episodes sound a little insane or crazy, hell, it might not even make any sense, but it's for a point that I will be making later on in this video. I promise there is a point to the insanity. I think. Now, be warned, this is the spoiler warning of a lifetime.
We have to go back!
The pilot episode starts off with Jack Shepherd, our main character, waking up in the middle of a bamboo field on the island, moments after the plane just crashed onto the beach. For a good chunk of the first episode, it's the survivors of Flight 815 trying to figure out what happened and struggling to get food and water and makeshift shelters while waiting for rescue. It's not going to come. In the first part of the pilot, we hear noises and see trees being knocked down in the middle of the woods from a giant monster. Characters say it sounds familiar, and there's almost a mechanical sound to the creature, but that's never going to come into play. Later in part 2, we see the pilot of the plane being eaten by said monster, but we get no visual for the moment. We meet John Locke, whom appears to have some kind of uncanny connection to the island. And in later episodes, we find out before crashing onto the island, he was stuck in a wheelchair, unable to walk. We learned that there are sinister other people on the island, called the Others, and they are led by a man in a beard that is known to the fans of the show as Mr. Friendly, that have been kidnapping people and taking them into the jungle for God knows what. In later parts of the season, John Locke and Boone find a metal hatch in the middle of the jungle, and they do everything in their power to open it. But it doesn't end well for Boone. But John Locke says it's a sacrifice the island demands. There's a radio tower that has been playing the same code for a very long time, on repeat. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. leading to the discovery of polar bears and a crazy French woman that has been living on the island in isolation for so long that has seemingly driven her mad. Locke claims to have seen the eye of the island. It's a bright, beautiful white light, while Jack Shepherd has been chasing his dead father around the jungle for an entire episode. The flashbacks don't provide much in the way of answering questions about the island as such, but there are a few hints and Easter eggs scattered around. And on the island, there is plenty of talk from Locke about destiny and fate, but truly nothing that can answer the important questions just yet. There are a group of survivors that make a raft and attempt to leave the island, but once they're in the ocean, they are stopped by the others, and Walt, you remember Walt, right? Walt, Mike's son, well, he's kidnapped, and the others leave Jen, Sawyer, and Michael in the middle of the ocean with no way back. In the season's final scene, Locke, Jack, and Kate blow the hatch door open, and they stare down inside, and the screen cuts to black. Okay, you got it? You sure? It's only going to make less sense from here on forward. The first episode of Season 2 brings us inside the hatch. There we find a man named Desmond Hume. Desmond has been typing the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42 into a computer every 108 minutes. And when he does this, Desmond claims to have just saved the world. This is where the Dharma Initiative is first brought onto the show, a scientific research community with stations all over the island, but now they all appear to have been abandoned. When Desmond runs away, it forces Jack and Locke to take over the duties of typing the numbers into the computer. This causes some friction between the two because Jack believes it does nothing, and Locke believes this is their destiny to type these numbers. We are caught up with the tail end of the plane that crashed onto the island and the rest of its survivors. I'm not going to mention this storyline any more than I have to because by the end of the third season, everyone but one character was dead. However, Bernard in later episodes is reunited with his wife Rose in an amazingly touchy scene. We learn that she had cancer before getting to the island, but now that she's here, she believes she's cured. We find out that Hugo, aside from winning the lottery, was also in a mental institution before getting to the island, and that somehow his imaginary friend Dave is on the island as well, and he may or may not be real. We take a trip to the center of the jungle where we find a massive pirate ship that's appeared to crash here ages ago, the Black Rock. But how did it get here? We won't know for a very long time. We get another good look at the smoke monster, and we see it in all its glory as it appears to judge people before deciding to kill them or not. The survivors find a man in the middle of the jungle as well, claiming to be Henry Gale, an explorer who crashed onto the island years ago in a hot air balloon. In later parts of the season, it turns out that he is the leader of the others, and his real name is Ben Linus. Ben has claimed to come to the survivors because Locke is special, and he wants to bring them back to their camp. We learn a little more about Desmond's backstory, how he came to find himself on the island for the past couple of years, and we learn about the love of his life, Penny, and how he misses her desperately. The season ends when Locke decides to stop pressing the button, believing it's some cosmic joke. And at the same time, Jack, Sawyer, Michael, and Kate, and Hugo want to spring a trap on the others, while Saeed, Jin, and Sun take a small boat to flank them. This is where they find the remains of the four-toed statue, and this will get people talking for a very long time. To keep the hatch from imploding, Desmond uses his failsafe key, and the entire sky turns purple and implodes. The season ends with Michael making a deal with Ben to bring his group to the others, and in return, Michael and Walt, you remember Walt, right? Yeah, Walt, can leave the island. The final scene of the show is the others putting hoods over our heroes' heads and letting Hugo go back to the beach with a message: no one is to come after them. You know, I'm starting to think you people might think I'm making all this up, or maybe I'm drinking bourbon and just talking philosophicals, but I promise this is the plot of the show. Season 3 opens up inside what fans are going to call Dharmaville. It's a small community of homes deep in the jungle, and they have lights and running water, and I hope air conditioning, because I'm sure it gets hot on the island. We meet a new character, Juliet Burke, and she's getting ready for a book club when she has an odd interaction with Ben Linus, just moments before Flight 815 crashes onto the island. Back on the beach, Desmond and Locke both wake up in the middle of the jungle, completely naked, where for some reason Locke has lost his voice and has to kill a polar bear to save Mr. Echo, who's only going to die in 2 episodes.
Desmond began having visions
Desmond,
of the future.
due to being at the center of the hatch's implosion, has become unstuck in time. And he's flashing back and forth throughout time. When he has to center himself again, he finds that he has the ability to see glimpses or flashes of the future.
And she claimed to be working.
The others have been able to come and go from the island for some time. They have the ability to communicate with the outside world. They have plenty of money, and somehow they know who was on the plane shortly after it crashed. It also turns out that you can't get sick on the island, but yet somehow Ben has cancer. And Ben has kidnapped Jack to force him to perform the operation, using his love for Kate as motivation. Kate and Sawyer are being kept in another Dharma research station where they're building a runway for a reason that won't be paid off till season 5. Jack makes a deal that he'll do the surgery if he's allowed to leave the island with Juliet on the submarine, and Kate and Sawyer can go back to the beach. Desmond and Charlie find a woman, Naomi, who's ejected from a helicopter onto the island. And this is all part of Desmond's visions of the future, his flashes. A future where it appears Charlie is destined to die. We get more time with the smoke monster as it chases Kate and Juliet around the jungle after Juliet has been abandoned by her people. Now, okay, this next plotline is going to take a minute to explain. Please just bear with me. Locke's dad tossed him out a window. Locke was put in a wheelchair and could not walk again permanently. When he gets to the island, he has the ability to walk. Now, it turns out that when Locke joins the others because he's special, it turns out that his dad has been brought to the island as well. The others kidnapped him and brought him here after the plane crash. In order to join the others, he has to kill his father. Also, a quick addendum, this is the storyline where we will meet Richard Alpert, someone who has been on the island a very, very, very long time. That will be explained at some other point, not here. Now, also, when James Sawyer Ford was a boy, his mother was conned by a man named Sawyer out of a great deal of money. James' father killed his mother and himself. That con man was also the same man that tossed Locke out a window. So when Locke is unable to kill his father, he convinces Sawyer to do it for him. When Locke returns to the others, Ben tells him about the leader of the island, a man known as Jacob, and only Ben can see or interact with Jacob. Locke convinces him to go on a trek to Jacob's cabin. And it turns out that Ben has lied, and he's never been able to see Jacob. He's never communicated with Jacob. But somehow, Locke just did. Ben shoots Locke in the stomach and leaves him for dead. But Walt, remember Walt? Yeah, Walt. A vision of Walt shows up and tells Locke that he's not done. We also, in this episode, get a flashback to when Ben was a boy and when he arrived on the island and his father worked as a janitor for the Dharma Initiative. We see the Dharma Initiative when it was a fully functional group. And we also get to see Richard Alpert, who hasn't aged a day in 20 plus years. The season ends when the boat coming to the island arrives, but they learn the boat isn't coming to save them, and it comes at the sacrifice of Charlie. It's not Penny's boat. The biggest part of the finale is throughout the episode, we see flashbacks, or what we think are flashbacks. Jack has become a drunk, he's in a bad place, he's even suicidal. But the final scene, he meets with Kate outside an airport, and he begs her to go back to the island, showing that at some point, they do indeed get off the island. Not too bad, not too convoluted. Yeah, it's a mess, but it only gets worse from here. Season 4 picks up shortly after Season 3 ends, almost immediately. And it's from here that the show's going to really go off the deep end. So if you're not here for it, you're not going to be here for it, because this is not going to make any more sense. You ready? Okay. The survivors split into 2 camps. Half the people go with Locke, thinking that the people from the freighter are not here to help them and possibly to harm them. And the other half goes with Jack because they think he's going to get them off the island. We're introduced to a bunch of new characters that have come from the freighter. Frank Lapidus, Miles, Daniel Faraday, and Charlotte. We get a couple of small tidbits of their character and their past through the very short flashbacks in the first episode. And for most of this season, the episodes are going to feature the gimmick flash forwards. And through this gimmick, we see the Oceanic Six: Kate, Jack, Sayid, Hugo, Sun, and baby Aaron as they return home. And we learn that they had to lie about everything that happened on the island to keep the people still on the island safe. We see Jack and Kate, they fall in love, and they play mommy and daddy to baby Aaron, and they play house. But slowly he realizes that it was a mistake to leave the island. And Jack starts to become unhinged. He's drinking more, he's seeing visions of his father, he's taking medication, he's suicidal. Hugo, thinking that he has lost his freaking mind, checks himself into the hospital, where we learn that he's been talking to the dead. And in one scene, we see him talk to Charlie, and he even says goodbye to Mr. Echo as they're playing chess. Sayid has become an assassin, and it turns out that he's a hired killer for Ben. But wait a minute. Ben hasn't left the island, at least not yet. The people have come to the island, indeed, but they haven't come to help get anyone off. In fact, the man named Charles Woodmore has sent these people to the island to kill Ben and everyone else on the beach if they get in his way. It turns out that Ben had been able to get Michael on the boat and working as his spy, and he's been feeding them information. There is a stellar, and I mean stellar, episode in which Desmond Hume, his flashes are getting worse. And it turns out that he needs to contact his constant, someone in the past and the present that can center him. And it is one of the best episodes I have ever seen in television. Also, it comes out that the island, it skips through time and has its own properties, as we've already guessed. We see a siege on Dharmaville led by one of the show's best villains, Kimi, and he kills Ben's daughter. And in this episode, we learn that the others have the special ability to summon the smoke monster. And we see a fight between armed assassins and the smoke monster. I won't tell you who wins. Ben and Locke go back to the cabin in the woods, and inside, a man who looks like Christian Shepherd and claims to be Jacob is inside. And he claims that they need to move the island in order to save everyone. We see a flash forward where Ben wakes up in the middle of the desert, and it appears he has moved 3 hours into the future. He goes to Widmore and claims that he's going to kill Widmore's daughter, Penny, for having his daughter brutally murdered. In the final episode, we see the 6 survivors get off the island with Desmond because Penny was out there to save them. And back on the island, Ben goes down into another Dharma research facility and he finds a cave. Okay, now listen to me, everyone. This is going to sound really freaking insane. And trust me, this is really freaking insane. Also, we see a Dharma video with a time-traveling bunny. It's awesome. Ben finds a frozen donkey wheel. Let me repeat that. Ben finds a frozen donkey wheel. And when he turns it, he vanishes into thin air. And while sailing away, Jack and the others see the island vanish as well. While Locke meets up with the others and assumes his role as their leader, the season ends when Jack, in a flash forward, goes to the funeral parlor where someone has died. He opens the coffin and we see John Locke laying there dead. And from the shadows, Ben says they're going to need to take him back to the island too.
What the hell?
All right, we're at season 5. Okay, look, I know it's a complicated show. It's convoluted. It's insane. But I really feel like you need the context to understand what I'm going to try to say at the end of the video. So please just bear with me. I know things are going to get insane, but we only have 2 seasons left. You ready? No? I don't care. I'm doing this on my own. We see through the flashbacks this season that Ben and Jack have been going around trying to convince everyone to go back to the island. Oddly enough, no one but Jack and Ben want to go back. I mean, no one's in a hurry to go see kill teams sent by billionaires, giant smoke monsters, and struggling just to get food and water. The others have more or less adjusted to their lives off the island. Kate and Son are mothers. They have their own companies and they're doing their own things. Saeed very much does whatever Saeed does. Hugo is slowly losing his mind as he's talking to his fallen friends and no one believes him. Jack is a suicidal drug addict and he's getting visions of his father, so it's not going well. Jack, desperate, makes a deal with the devil, and so Ben helps Jack to convince everyone to go back to the island, but he does it more or less blackmailing them. We also see that indeed Locke has been off the island. And he even met with Walt. You remember Walt? Yeah, well, Walt's off the island too. And Walt tells Locke that if he goes back to the island, he's going to be in trouble. Ben finds Locke and murders him in an attempt to convince everyone to go back to the island. And it works. He convinces Jack, convinces everyone else. So season 5 picks up right after the island has been moved. The survivors left on the island have been skipping through time. There's a bright light, and after that light ends, the survivors vanish, and they appear at different times on the island. Each time they flash, it is followed by extreme headaches, which get worse. We follow them as they flash through the 50s, the 70s, sometime before the four-toed statue was ever destroyed. But in order to set things right, Locke goes down into another well, another cave, and he finds another donkey wheel where he moves it. And this is where he learns he has to die to get everyone to come back. Once he moves it, he vanishes back onto the mainland. And the rest of the survivors are stuck in 1974. Sawyer and Juliet, along with the others, make their way to the Dharma Initiative, where they join and live for 3 years. Sawyer and Juliet form a romantic relationship. They get engaged, and for a while things are going pretty good. Then Jack and the others take Flight 316 and they land back in 1977, while Ben's son crashed with the rest of the plane in present time, with a whole host of new survivors. And, shock of all shock, John Locke, who was previously dead, well, he's alive and well. From this point forward, we see Jack and the others trying to figure out how to reset time, or at least get back to their present time. Jack figures, with the help of Daniel Faraday, that if they drop a nuke into the pocket of energy where their hatch will be built, it's going to set everything right. We also jump to 2007, where Locke and Ben are trying to make their way to see Jacob, building up to the reveal of who Jacob is, and promising to give us answers for the first time in 5 seasons. We're not going to get answers till next season. We also learn that there is a connection with the smoke monster and John Locke. This all comes to a head when Jack and the others indeed set the nuke off at the future site of the hatch, but we won't know that outcome until season 6. However, the season ends when Locke and Ben go to see Jacob, and it's clear that Locke and Jacob indeed have a past. Locke can't kill Jacob, but Ben can. In a fit of rage, Ben jams an old dagger into Jacob's stomach. And while he's dying on the beach, he says they're coming, and it's revealed outside the temple that Locke is still in his coffin. So who's the Locke in the four-toed statue? Here we are, the final stretch, season 6. Ready? Okay. The need to keep the flashback gimmick going from the writers, they introduce what's called the flash sideways, where the survivors are alive, even the dead ones, no longer dead, and it's as if they never crashed on the island. They land from Sydney into LA with no problems, but somehow they were all more or less still connected to one another. But back in the present time, the survivors from 1977 arrive in 2010, while back at the beach, it turns out that Locke is indeed the smoke monster in human form. It turns out that all the way back in some unknown time, Jacob and the smoke monster, also known as the Man in Black, were born on the island after some Roman ship had crashed thousands of years ago. They have taken in by a woman known only as Mother, who may or may not have been another version of the smoke monster. She takes them in and she raises them. She makes it so that the two brothers cannot hurt each other, and shows them a bright light at the center of the island. It's the light that's in every human being. You follow me now? Because that's about as much answers as we're ever going to get. Through some long, sordid events, Jacob throws his brother into the bright light, and the Man in Black becomes the smoke monster. And for the past several hundred years, Jacob has been bringing people to the island, as he calls them candidates, to finally take over his role as leader of the island. Back in modern day, Jacob, now dead, needs someone to take over his leadership role. We get an ending to the Widmore-Ben feud, and it's more or less a face turn, kind of, not really, for Ben. It turns out that Desmond's also back on the island for some reason. The story comes to a head when most of the cast are whittled down to just a handful, and shockingly enough, Kate kills the Man in Black with a bullet from a gun after they've uncorked the bright light at the center of the island. With no other choice, Jack sacrifices himself to save the island by putting the cork back. And that leaves Hugo to take over the role of leader of the island, with Ben Linus being his second in command. The show ends in the flash sideways, where it turns out that it's been the afterlife. And they had set it up so that they could all find one another once they passed. And as everyone meets in the afterlife, Jack dies in the same exact spot he woke up in the pilot. Now, you have context. We can finally move the hell on. Charlie Pace, played by Dominic Monaghan. Charlie wasn't my favorite character, and frankly, I really wouldn't even put him on this list, but he is important to the story of Lost, no doubt. And people would be asking me why I didn't put him here. So, here he is. Charlie was a drug-addicted rock star in the one-hit wonder band called Drive Shaft. Their one and only song or hit was called You Are Everybody. It's kind of catchy, actually. When I first started watching the show all the way back in 2007, I really disliked Charlie. Maybe in dealing in my own addiction, this character hit just a little too close to home for me. Before he got to the island, as we see in the flashbacks, he's just a complete screw-up. He's ruined the band, he's ruined his relationship with his brother, everything he touched just turned to garbage. It wasn't until he got to the island and he met Claire and helped raise her son Aaron, and then he had gotten clean. They brought up the idea of him relapsing a few times, but to Charlie's credit, no matter how fucked up the situation on the island got, he stayed clean. While his flashback episodes weren't really good at all, it did help to show just how far his character had come in this journey on the island. As I said before, he met Claire, helped raise Aaron, he had gotten clean, he made friends. Hugo was like his best friend. He had a very tenuous relationship with Desmond, but ultimately they were friends. It was a complete character change. The island saved Charlie, or it helped Charlie save himself. He went from someone who was afraid of the world and addicted to drugs, someone who wanted to die, to risking his life to save the people he cared about. Now, just because I didn't like Charlie too much does not mean his death in season 3 didn't get me in the feels. At the end of the 3rd season, we learned that the people that had arrived on the island to save them were not there to help them. And Charlie sacrifices himself, leaving a single message for his friend Desmond, not Penny's boat. This was a gut punch, one that lingered well into season 4 and even into season 5. They brought him back in the last season in a sideways storyline, and yeah, it was convoluted, but I did like seeing the return of Charlie, and he finally reunites with Claire and her baby Aaron. Going back to rewatch the show now for this video, I find that I like Charlie much more than I did back then. I don't know, maybe seeing how his character had changed for the better and seeing how I had changed for the better and I had gotten clean, I can now see myself in that journey. So maybe in the end, maybe I really did like Charlie. Dr. Daniel Faraday, expertly, and I mean expertly portrayed by Jeremy Davies, is a real hard one to talk about because the character is just so tied to time travel, other timelines, alternate realities, and nuclear bombs that what I want to talk about is just going to sound like the lunatic rantings of a mad person. But more or less, that is his story here. And that is why I wanted to give you a little bit of context going forward. When he gets to the island, his brain is completely scrambled from all the time doing research in time travel. It's more or less put him out of time. But the island, as we've discovered, has healing factors. So in season 4, when we first meet him on the island, he is thinking clearly for the first time in a very, very long time. And you can see it on his face. There's a confusion because he's finally able to think and process thoughts. As we go through the storyline, we see that he's been to the island in the past, and he's already met his mother and his father previously through time travel on the island. We see that this was always going to happen to him because, as the show states, what happened, happened. It happened in the past, so there was no way for Daniel to get out of it. And by the time we see him on the island, he had already traveled back to the 50s. His mother had already seen him die before her eyes, even before he was born. And again, I know it's all insane to talk about. The point is, Daniel's whole life, he had been pushed away by his parents. They kept him at an arm's length, forced him into this course of action because what happens, happens. And they withheld love and attachment because they knew what was going to happen. And it's tragic because he never stood a chance to be happy. He never had a chance at anything. His parents were horrible people. They pushed him to the island. They pushed him into the situation. It's a very vicious cycle. And it makes it tragic seeing how his end finally comes. That said, of course, his interactions with others were truly what makes this character work. He meets a woman named Charlotte, whom he falls in love with, and he tries to change time to save her. But as we've discovered, what happens, happens. Every moment you spend with him is just tragic because it's out of his control. There's nothing he can do. It's going to happen because it already happened. It's hard to put into words exactly what makes this character work. Clearly, it's Jeremy Davies and his amazing acting and his charisma as Faraday. But there is something else that is captured there. There's a sadness in the eyes of Davies. It's a sadness that stays with you well after he dies. Has there ever been a more likable character than Hugo in the history of television? Probably not. But it didn't always start out that way. You see, when Hugo won the lottery off playing the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42, his life got infinitely worse. It was as if winning the lottery was the worst thing in the world that could have ever happened to poor Hurley. Hugo's grandfather died, then his new restaurant blew up and killed a news anchor. His house burnt down, his mom fell down the steps. He bought a shoe company, and that shoe company was responsible for the deaths of 8 people. Hugo thought he was cursed. He was just the most miserable, unhappy, sad person. And it appeared like he was going to be unhappy his entire life. The only one in the history of Lost that appears to have been sadder was John Locke. On the island, while he could be serious from time to time when a situation called for it, he spent most of his time being positive and upbeat and helping people. The total opposite from his time off the island. Though Hugo was in just about every episode, he was never seen as being important. He never had lore-centric episodes. And he was more or less subjected to being a comedic or lighthearted episode, like repairing an old van or playing golf or conning Sawyer into being nice for some reason. As it turns out, however, he was meant to lead the island, to take over. And I think it was his compassion, his laughter, his positivity, his willingness to help people. Because he just wanted to help people. Not because some long con, not because of power or some grand design, but because he wanted to help people because it made him happy. He liked to help people. Hugo, over the course of 6 seasons, grows. He starts out as someone who's unsure of themselves and he thinks he's insane. He thinks he's unlucky. And in the last couple of seasons, he finally realizes that he's special, that he was meant to do something special. And in fact, he does. The acting overall in the early seasons was really stiff and not the best. Aside from Matthew Fox and Terry O'Quinn, those two were veteran actors. It took time for the entire cast and Garcia to really find their footing on the show. However, in the later seasons, he gives some truly heartbreaking performances, like telling his friends about the loss of Charlie, coming to terms with his own sanity. I also just want to briefly say that the episode Dave with Hugo's imaginary friend, who may or may not have been on the island, who may or may not have been real, is just the most weird, strange episode I could have ever imagined. And I could see that being in season 4 of Twin Peaks, with Cooper seeing a imaginary friend he had back in college. It's just messed up all around and fantastic. Saeed was a former interrogator in the Middle East who was more or less blackmailed into working for the United States on an occasion. He did some terrible and unspeakable things. There were some truly vicious acts that he had committed. And after meeting the love of his life, Nadia, he had more or less given up his old life and tried to start over. He was atoning for the things he had done. And when he got off the island, he never expected to see her again. And they reunited, and he started to live. He started to be happy. And then she was killed in a hit and run. He had her, and he lost her. It's an odd motif that happens in this show, and I just wanted to touch on it here. But it does happen for many characters on the show. But when I really think of Saeed, I think he was just the only smart one on the island. He saw some crazy shit, but you know what? He just wanted to get the hell out of there. It wasn't his problem. He wanted to go home. He knew smoke monsters and giant four-toed statues probably meant there was some other stuff going on, but he didn't care. He was another archetype too. He was another action star. He knew how to fight. He could track. He could kick ass. He could take names. However, there was a stereotypical storyline that I feel like they enforced on Middle Eastern characters after 9/11. It lingered for some time in the first couple of seasons, and I think it was just tired. I think a lot of his storylines suffered from him either being called racial slurs from Sawyer in the pilot episode, or dealing with terrorism storylines that just were tired by the time they got to Lost. It's the same reason why 24 went off the deep end so quickly. It was old hat in season 3, and they didn't need to do it, but they kept going back to that storyline. Saeed really gets interesting when he goes back in time to 1977 and he shoots a boy in the stomach. Yes, young Ben Linus, and yes, he will be a monster. He will do terrible things in the future, but does killing a child justify that? Does all the pain that he'll inflict on Saeed in the future, does that justify shooting a young boy who's done nothing but be kind to him? Young Ben is kind. He cares about Saeed. He brings him food when Saeed's in jail. But Saeed doesn't care. Once he gets back to the island, he's already soulless. He doesn't need to be corrupted by the man in black. The love of his life is dead. He had her, and he lost her. And when he lost her, he just lost his passion, his need to live. So by the time he meets the man in black, it really wasn't even difficult for him to turn to the dark side. He was already dead inside. Now, Andrews is brilliant. And I wish he had taken off into other things. He's in a couple of movies and TV shows, but he has these big, dark, soulful eyes that can just express a world of emotions. They always just linger there in sadness. He always looks like he's on the verge of crying. And even when he's happy, even when he smiles or he does have love, which he does, we do see in parts of the show, there's still a little bit of Garmonbozia there, just in the distance, a little sadness. He has such an expressive face. And I mean, he's really hot. Naveen Andrews is fucking hot. So anytime he took his shirt off on Lost, I was there for it. I'm still there for it. But this character is really special, and the actor is amazing. And I don't think you could have had Lost. You could not have told the story of Lost without Saeed's journey being there. Look, I'll be honest with you guys. I hated Jack Shephard for much of the first couple of seasons. Jack was just the cookie cutter hero that every adventure action show had ever had, or movie for that matter. A good looking white guy who just happened to be a doctor with a strong moral code that jumps into danger without thinking. Jack was just nothing new. It was boring. Blah, 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 boring. Matthew Fox was fine enough on the show in the early seasons. They just had written Jack to be such an arrogant character, so strong in his convictions that he couldn't see when he was wrong. And in real life, that can be inspiring maybe, but here I just found it generic and kind of insulting. I think this was part of the plan though, because to make a new hero, to rebuild Jack, they needed to take the stereotypical character. They needed to take the archetype of the good-looking white guy who's ready to do anything at the drop of a hat and destroy it. I will try to cover this more in a later part of this video, but I just wanted to give that hint now. It wasn't until season 4 when Jack started to see some cracks into what he believed. When the people came to the island to kill them all, and when Ben moved the island, these were good moments that started to open up Jack's eyes to the world. However, Shephard being broken, being so completely lost that he needed to come back to the island, that he needed to be that person who left, that hero, that's what made him interesting. However, him getting to the island, he did become a hero, a new hero, a different person. Someone completely different than the man in the pilot episode. And that is personally what I liked. Fox in season 5 and 6, he's just amazing. Seeing him with nothing, seeing him lose everything. And then when he gets to the island, he slowly starts to find himself once more. He slowly starts to believe that there is a reason that he is at the island. Again, maybe the island, its healing properties can heal depression. I don't know, I doubt it. But he starts to put himself back together. He starts to find the person, not who he thought he was going to be, not the good-looking white guy who's going to jump in at it, but someone that he's really meant to be. The person that was inside that exterior. Because the Jack in the pilot, that was just a projection. That was just a wall. That was what he thinks, what television thought we wanted. But what we wanted, what we needed in television, what we need in a hero is much more complex. There's a scene in season 6 after learning that Jacob has been watching him his entire life. He just goes and he sits on a beach and he just looks out into the water. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to say anything. The weight of the entire world, his entire life's choices has been resting on his shoulders. I think it's this scene where we finally see the new Jack Shephard. Again, in season 4, 5, and 6, Matthew Fox just nails almost every scene he's in. And it's amazing. And he's a great character, and I love it very much. James Sawyer Ford, played by Josh Holloway. For much of the show's early run, Sawyer was more or less a heel for those first 3 seasons. The first season alone saw him do some very questionable things. He was known for hoarding food and water, keeping medicines for himself. He made sexist comments, bigoted remarks to Saeed. James only looked out for himself, and while through the first 2 or 3 seasons there were moments where he could show a nicer side, he only really did the right thing if there was something in it for him. I think by the 3rd season, it was clear that people were falling for the good-looking bad boy, and James Holloway was becoming one of the biggest breakout stars of the show. With the rugged good looks and that killer smile, it took very little time for people to want to root for him. That's not to say that the third season didn't see James do some very questionable things. Middle of the third season, he alone was responsible for the death of Nikki and Pablo, and it came out that he had kidnapped Sun later in season 2. Sawyer did have an interesting arc, and there were many levels to everything about him in those early seasons. He came off as uneducated, but he could quote books. He was always seen reading. He acted like he didn't care about anyone, but clearly he loved Kate. It was another take on the archetype that Lost was so famous for. They would take a stereotype, an archetype, and by this third or fourth season, they would break it, and they would remold that archetype into something new. They did it with Jack, they did it with Saeed, and they did it with Hugo. And here, they took the archetype of the bad boy with a smile, and they broke it, and they changed it. Season 5, being stuck in the past with Juliet, the two of them formed a bond. It was very palpable. They had severe chemistry. And when she was killed at the end of the 5th season, it was soul-crushing, not just to Sawyer, but to the viewers. He had her, and he lost her. Again, there's that motif that we've been seeing throughout the course of the show. They'd like to have the characters love someone, and then either lose them in death or because of a relationship failing. The 6th season, he took a couple steps backwards, siding with the Man in Black for a little while, for the sole reason of wanting to leave the island. He was so angry and bitter, and without Juliet, there was nothing left. I want to talk about the scene where he finally meets Juliet in the afterlife. It's one of the best scenes the show had ever done. It always makes me tear up. It's the words, the emotion, everything written on the page. But no doubt, it's because Holloway and Mitchell just have such chemistry. It goes all the way back to when they first meet in season 3. It's a remarkable scene.
What do you want, Jack?
I had her. And I lost her.
Desmond Hume, played by Henry Ian Cusick. You know, there's a lot to this character, and there's a lot that I want to say, because Desmond Hume has a lot of depth to him, and it's hard to know just where to start. I think that his story is one of despair and hopelessness for much of his time on and off the island. Desmond spent so much of his time off the island running from love, running from long-term commitment. He fell in love with a woman, and literally just before they were to be married, he ran off and joined the military, once again avoiding commitment. Once in the military, he tries to run away, and he's put in jail for the next couple of years. And when he gets out, he joins a brotherhood where he attempts to find faith making wine, and more or less almost becomes a monk. Once again, another commitment is broken. But all is not lost, because here he finds Penny Widmore, the woman that would indeed quickly become the love of his life. However, her father, Charles Widmore, dislikes him, and in an attempt to win Mr. Widmore's respect, Desmond enters a boat race around the world, one that Penny's father has stake in. Once again, Desmond runs away from love, runs away from commitment, runs away from something that's important. And what happens? He crashes on the island, and for the next 3 years, he is forced to press a button every 108 minutes. During this time, he truly sees what's important. That the only thing in the world that he wants is to see his dear Penny again. His despair, his sadness, takes him to the point of suicide. When the others meet him, they think Desmond is insane. And hell, for all we knew at the time, he might damn well have been. Because for the last 3 years, he's been stuck in a room with only his regrets, his self-hatred, and his despair to keep him company. Even in prison, there was hope. He had a sentence, and when that ran out, he would be able to go free. But here on the island, there was nothing. No hope to be found. The best scene, where Desmond truly peaks, I would say his story could have ended in this episode, The Constant. Hume is bouncing back and forth between time, past and present, and Faraday tells him to contact someone in the past and in the future. There is a touching scene where Desmond, he goes to speak with Penny in the past and begs her to answer a call in 3 years. She thinks he's a lunatic. She scribbles off a number. Then, on the freighter, we see Desmond finally make contact with Penny. He calls. The phone rings and rings, and when it seems like she's not going to pick up, there she is. She centers him. She's his constant. Penny has been looking for him for the last 3 years. This connection between these two actors is incredible. We see very little of them on screen together, but their chemistry is palpable and incredible. This scene is amazing and portrays the true power of two star-crossed lovers finally connecting again. John Locke, magnificently portrayed by Terry O'Quinn. This is the character that has always kept me coming back to the show. There are a lot of the layers, and this could easily be the subject of his own video. John Locke was a man that had been put in a wheelchair and unable to walk, seemingly for the rest of his life. But even before that, his life was nothing but pain and suffering, or as others would say, garmonbozia. He was put up for an adoption as a baby, and from there, it never got much better for him. I would even include coming to the island in that statement. Locke was conned by his father to give up one of his kidneys, and when he came looking for answers as to why his dad would do this, Anthony Cooper, his father, tossed him out a damn window. He worked some dead-end jobs, getting fired from a job at a box company. He had a partner, but as the motif goes, he had her, and he lost her. And when he got to the island, he was shocked to see that he could walk. And this was the origin of him thinking that he was special. I mean, how could he not be? He woke up on the island, he wasn't hurt, and in fact, he was healed. Ben fed into this when they met, claiming that he had come to the beach looking for Locke to bring him back to the others, that he was to lead the others. He was the only one that Ben knew of that could communicate with Jacob. And then Locke was shot, and if it wasn't for him not having a kidney, he would have been dead. So when Ben moved the island, he left the others, and Locke took over. So when Locke went back in time, and he met Richard Alpert, he told Richard that he was their future leader, that he was special. It was this specialness that made him an easy target for the Man in Black to manipulate. It was John's need to be a part of something bigger. It was his desire to know that this was all for a reason, that all his pain and suffering was of some grand design, and it made it easy to be pushed into his fate. When Locke gets off the island, he was murdered by Ben. The Man in Black claims that Locke didn't even understand why he was dying. And that was the point. Locke said he was special. He might have been special, but his blind faith in the island never allowed him to wonder why he was special. He was special because the smoke monster wanted to wear his skin as a meat suit. There was a desperation in Quinn's acting. He wants so badly to believe that there's a reason for this, that he's meant for something else. And there are times where he can go from manic desperation that he doesn't understand and then right into unshakable faith in the island. It all comes from the fact that while John does indeed believe in the island, the truth of the matter is that he never believed in himself. And in the end, that's his downfall. Ben Linus, played by Michael Emerson. You know, I remember all the way back in season 2 when Ben Linus was pretending to be Henry Gale. And he's stuck in the hatch with Jack and he's having breakfast. And Ben tells how he would spring a trap for the survivors if he was the leader of the others. He then ends the story with a little joke, trying to play it off as coy as possible. Ben always had a plan. No matter what the situation called for, he knew what he was going to do. And when Ben left for the hatch, he knew how he was going to get away. He had a plan to get Jack to perform the operation. Then, when it was time for Jack to leave the island, Ben had planted seeds in Locke's mind to get him to blow up the sub. From season 2 to the middle of season 4, there's nothing really redeeming about Ben. He does some truly disgusting things. He has Juliet's boyfriend sent to his doom because Juliet won't love Ben, but Ben has claimed her. He tortures his own daughter's boyfriend throughout those early seasons. He's done some really, truly terrible and awful things. And while at the time he had not a single redeeming quality, that was going to change in the final season. He was always collected and methodical, but when he sees his daughters murdered right in front of him, Ben just goes off the deep end. When he gets off the island, he only wants to kill Penny Widmore and then come back. And he does some truly disgusting things to do so. Blackmails Kate, manipulates Jack, and he even kills Locke. When he comes to the island, his entire world is shaken when he sees the man he had killed only days before still alive, walking and warm. It's then, when the smoke monster starts manipulating Ben, that he can truly see how terrible he has been. The same way he had done to Locke, the same way he had done to everyone in his life, the smoke monster, the man in black, was doing the same to him. It all led to the end of the season 5 finale. Ben is hurting from the death of his daughter. He lost his place on the island. He had nothing else in the world. And when he pleads to Jacob for answers, for some kind of acknowledgement, anything that might make him feel a little better, Jacob looks into Ben's eyes with sorrow and sadness, and he says, "What about you?" Ben is pushed to his limit and murders Jacob. But in that moment, as Jacob is dying, he regrets his actions. When he starts to see the real evil, the real bad guy is out, and he has plans for the rest of the world, and that nothing can stop him now that Jacob's dead, Ben does indeed get his face turned in the middle of season 6. When confronted by a follower of Jacob, Ben goes into a heartfelt, powerful speech. It's incredible and an amazing scene. And she forgives Ben, claiming that he doesn't have to go to the smoke monster. She'll take him. She shows him a kindness that Ben had never felt before. His mother had died in labor. He had nothing from her. His father was an abusive drunk. Widmore never liked him. Jacob didn't even acknowledge his existence. Richard was too busy being emo and walking around without shoes. He had never known any kindness. But in this moment, when Alana forgives him, it shows him that there might be a better way. It shows him that maybe he can change. It's again another archetype, the main bad guy, the villain. I mean, for the beginning of the show, Ben Linus is the bad guy. But in the final moments of the show, he more or less takes Richard's old role as advising Hugo on how to run the island, even saying that there was a better way than the way that Richard and Jacob ran the island. And from what we know now, he did a good job. Hugo even said he was a good number 2. Now, he might have been calling Ben a piece of shit, but let's just hope that Ben Linus could find a little redemption in the afterlife.
Hey. Is he talking about what I think he was talking about? If you mean time-traveling bunnies, then yes.
Juliet Burke, played by Elizabeth Mitchell. This is the last entry on my rundown of characters, and it comes from mainly just the powerful acting of Miss Mitchell. Juliet appears in the first episode of season 3, and right away there's just something about her. From the moment Juliet comes on screen, there's just a presence that she carries with herself. And on a side note, I would just like to say that Elizabeth Mitchell has a smile that could just light up the room. Juliet Burke was a scientist, and her research had been able to help her sister get pregnant after a long battle with cancer. This breakthrough had gotten the attention of Ben Linus, thinking that it might help the women on the island give birth. That's been one of the things that appears to be impossible since the incident. She goes to the island, and from that moment forward, she can never leave, nor will she ever be able to see her sister again. She's being more or less held prisoner by Ben Linus. She hates him so much, but she is forced to play her role, play his game, and buy her time to hopefully get off the island. Whether it be with siding with Jack and leaving via the sub, or going to the freighter and hoping for rescue. Now, I'm going to get a few things out of the way before we go on. There's 2 qualities that I just find hypnotizing about Miss Mitchell. She has such powerful eyes, and when she is on screen, there's no other choice but to keep yours glued to the screen. Miss Mitchell also has the ability to muster up such sadness. Even when she's trying to be happy, you can still see it there. I know that I've said it a bunch of times with other characters, but it's true here as well. Lost had the ability to capture sadness and despair. It's in the words, it's on screen, it's in the direction, and it's there with Miss Mitchell. Juliet has such range, and right away you can't help but pull for her, and we as viewers just want her to be happy. In season 5, we probably see her character truly grow. Being stuck in 1974, she is heartbroken to realize that there's mostly no chance that she's ever going to be able to see her sister again. And playing house with Sawyer, she falls in love with him, and they get engaged, and everything that happened was happening. Being stuck in the past was okay because she finally found the love she deserved. Sadly for her, the ending of her time on the island came tragically and too soon, in one of the most heartbreaking scenes that Lost has created. They were going to try and reset time, and in doing this, it would wipe away her relationship with Sawyer. She goes along with it because it's something that Sawyer wants to do, and as heartbreaking as it is, she wants him to be happy. Sadly, Juliet doesn't make it through season 5, but her presence is felt throughout season 6 with Sawyer. It's in his sadness and his despair. And as I stated, the 2 of them meet again in the afterlife in one of the show's best produced scenes. And for these reasons alone, Juliet is one of my favorite characters on this show, and Elizabeth Mitchell is an actress I always look forward to seeing whenever she's on screen. The next section of this video, I'm going to take a few moments and I'm going to talk about some of the issues I find from time to time whenever I go onto Reddit, other message boards, and YouTube from people who are just as passionate about this show as me. A lot of people claim that the writers didn't answer everything. And while no, they didn't answer everything, I don't think Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof left too many unanswered plot lines out there. People also like to point out that while the writers claim to have had the whole show planned out, in the end, they were just making it up. But Damon Lindelof has always said that he knew the show was going to end with Jack Jack's eye closing in the same field he woke up at in the pilot. And while it's also indeed true that J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof had a Lost Bible, they only used it to sell Lost to the studio. Very little of that Bible made it into later seasons. So in a sense, they did have a plan, and from a certain point of view, I guess you could say they were lying. Another thing that could have been a problem for Lost was that it was on ABC, which was a network television. They might have had something completely planned out for a character, only to have the actor dropped from the show in the middle of their story arc for a contract dispute or legal issues. This happened. And in the case of young Walt, remember Walt? Yeah, Walt, Mike's son, Walt, yeah. Well, Walt was a kid with special powers, and ABC didn't want a kid with special powers. That he was growing up much quicker than anticipated, and they had to cut him from the show. Other than that, this happened a couple of times on the show, and those storylines needed to be reworked, and you could tell. Not to mention the big writer's strike that came during the break of Season 3. And also, TV's changed a bit in the last couple of years. Back then, when you had a TV show, it was clear you're going to have 25 episodes a season. And yeah, things did get brought up and forgotten from time to time. But they had so much time that needed to be filled just to get to the end of the season. Things did indeed change for Lost with the writer's strike, when they shortened Season 4 to about 14 episodes. I think that's where Lost truly picks up. Season 5 and 6 were 17 episodes, and the show moved much more fast-paced, much more condensed, and it was streamlined, and the end result, I think, is much better. I don't think they were making it all up as they went along. I do feel like the writers had an idea for some key points. As I've stated before, Jack was always going to die in the same bamboo field that he woke up in. However, I also know that going back and looking at Lost through today's eyes might be a little unfair. The way they make a TV show is different these days, and I think that maybe we have Lost to thank for that, for a lot of the changes in television. However, I do see a problem here where people can feel like maybe they were lied to, because there were a few times that maybe they were lied to. For me, the most notorious case of the writers lying to us, the fans, was in the case of a character named Annie. When Ben is a child, he meets a little girl named Annie on the island. By the way, Annie is the best name. It's a hell of a name. The writers on the DVD commentary claim that they were going to bring Annie back in a seismic shifting storyline. There were teases from Michael Emerson that maybe we have already met Annie. However, the show ended, we never saw Annie again, and shock of all shocks, she's never even mentioned again. Just a small blurb on the Lost Wikipedia. So no, the writers of Lost didn't answer that clearly, to say the least. But people like to claim that Lost never gave any answers, and I just don't think that's true. I think the writers did indeed listen to the fans, and I think they did indeed answer things. Now, maybe they were questions the viewers didn't ask, and maybe they were answers the viewers didn't like. But I think if you look, there are answers. Hell, they made an entire episode about Jack's tattoos that never added anything to the overall storyline of the show. But yet, there were people asking, what do Jack's tattoos mean? And before you ask, they mean he who walks among them, but is not one of them. Yeah, I know. Amazing. Whole episode about his tattoos. Since the show aired, people were demanding answers. But the point of Lost wasn't about the answers, it's about the mystery. It always was. However, I guess what I'm trying to say is that no show is perfect. And this brings me to a point I was trying to make all the way back about an hour ago when I was recapping the seasons of the show. People like to complain about plot holes, like they didn't explain why a giant bird called Hurley's name. Does that matter in the end? No. It was a show that was very out there with some bizarre themes and insane plot lines that when you said them out loud, it would sound like gibberish, as I displayed earlier. The show is about a smoke monster, time-traveling bunnies, frozen donkey wheels. It's a crazy show, and people like to get hung up on a plot hole here or there. Was Day real or not? Who knows? Who cares in the end? It doesn't matter. Like MST3K once said, just repeat to yourself it's just a show, and you should really just relax. So, did they plan everything out? No. Does that change the product we have now? No. Not at all. So from here, we're going to go down a few of the plot holes that people have, and I'm going to try to give them answers. Now, these are just my answers. You can disagree with me or agree with me, but this is how I find closure in some of the quote-unquote plot holes.
How long have
Every
you...
question I answer will simply lead to another question. You should rest.
And while we're on the subject, what did happen to Annie? Ben Linus's friend as a child, Annie, was last seen giving him a birthday present. Now, while there has never been an answer on screen, the writer Damon Lindelof said that she left the island back in 1977 when a nuke went off and caused the incident. But for me, I would like to think of it in another way. See, in my headcanon, Annie and Ben were a couple, and she died in childbirth. It would explain Ben's obsession with women being able to give birth on the island after the nuke had gone off. And it ties up a couple of plot holes, makes things kind of click a little bit better. Overall, I think it's better than just saying she left the island. In the 4th episode of Season 5, the survivors were flashing through time, and out of desperation, they take an outrigger to get away from where they are presently. But before too long, they are chased down by another group of people in another outrigger. It's only for a very quick few minutes, and then there's another flash of light, and once again, they are teleported to another time on the island. This is another story thread that was never resolved, and the writers did claim that it was going to be people from the Black Rock that were in the 1800s also suffering from time distortion. But I would like to think of it maybe in another way. In my headcanon, now this is just for me, you don't have to believe me, but for me, I'd like to think that the survivors were shooting at themselves in another point in time. I'd like to think that our survivors are still flipping through time. We never see this, of course, and we don't know who's in the other outrigger, but I just think it would fit the time travel elements that we're seeing in the 5th season. We do know that the survivors could see each other in different times on the island, but that's not what happened. I think it would have been cool to see more people from the Black Rock, of course, but I also feel like this was a budget hole, not necessarily a plot hole. Why could Christian Shepherd be seen off the island? Before the show ever starts, Christian's dead, and when he gets to the island, he's still dead. Yet, shock of all shocks, Jack Shepherd sees his daddy walking and warm in the middle of the jungle. Now, this is the smoke monster, without a shadow of a doubt, guaranteed, confirmed by Smokey himself. However, we do see Christian Shepherd off the island, haunting Jack when he's attempting to return to his normal life after being rescued. And we see Christian one other time when he appears to Michael on the freighter moments before it goes kablooey. Damon Lindelof, in his infinite wisdom, and I use wisdom very facetiously, said that Christian Shepherd on the boat was a ghost. And the Christian that Jack sees is, again, a ghost. Now, I'll begrudgingly say that Christian is a ghost when he's on the freighter, only because I don't have a better answer, but I'm not happy about it. I don't like it, but I'll agree to it. The Christian that Jack sees off the island, in my mind, is a little trickier. See, Jack has been popping pills and he's been drinking, he's suicidal, he's slowly losing his godforsaken mind. So I think that Jack is only imagining the visions of his father off the island. I think it just adds a little more sadness that he still can't deal with his daddy issues. Not to mention that the ghost we see appear to Jack and the ghost on the freighter are completely different and act different. So I have to say that yes, the Christian on the freighter is a ghost. The Christian that Jack sees is merely just hallucinations. Was John Locke special? This is a tricky one for me because sometimes I think maybe he was. I often go back and forth with it, but I do feel like he could very well have been. After all, the island saw fit to heal John, so I have to assume that at some level, at the very least, Locke was important. Was it the self-fulfilling prophecy that made him special? Was it that he said it so much that people around him started to think that Locke was important? It got him to be leader of the others, so maybe that's what it is. However, I also think those seeds were planted in Locke's head way before he ever got to the island in present day, by the smoke monster going back sometime in the island. But I think he could have indeed been special. I think he had the possibility to be phenomenal and to live up to his potential. He had the chance, but like I said earlier, I think if he just believed in himself a little more than he believed in the grand design, more than he believed in the island, then maybe the Man in Black might not have been able to use him as a meat suit. I think maybe we can look at Locke in a little bit of a meta sense, because I think that everyone can be special. I think that everyone has a chance to be phenomenal, to live up to their potential. We just need to believe in ourselves a little more than we believe in the grand design. Have faith in what we can do, and maybe we can live up to our full potential. Why are the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42 important? Now, this isn't answered so much on this show, although there is an answer, and I'll get to that in a moment. But a lot of it comes in the lore of the various ARGs that accompanied Lost. The Blazenti equation is the code that could predict the end of the world. Now, if you add up all the numbers, they come to 108. Why is this important, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. Desmond Hume was stuck in the hatch for 3 years, typing those numbers into a computer every 108 minutes to literally save the world. These numbers also were on the hatch door, as well as the numbers that Hurley had heard and used to win the lottery. So, were these numbers cosmically important, or is another time travel element here? I don't know. We're never going to know. Also, they did change the lore a little bit in Season 6, with each number being assigned to one of the candidates that Jacob had handpicked to one day replace him as leader of the island. Did Jacob have a hand in the Blazenti equation? I don't know. Is the candidate's number and the 108 number together make it a cosmically important number? I don't know. I don't think we're going to get a clear answer about the numbers, but I do think these two answers can pretty much resolve this plot hole to a satisfying enough degree. I'm going to take two topics here because I feel like they might go together, but they might not go together, but they might go together. And either way, the answer is not long enough to justify their own sections. So, who built the statue of Tuarte? Who built the temple? And why is the water in the temple able to bring back the dead? So, first and foremost, we know that because of the incident in 1977, when the Jughead nuke went off, it's impossible for women to give birth on the island. Right? Good. You with me? Good. Okay. Now, I think also it might have just been very difficult to have children on the island well before the incident. I feel like the Egyptians get to the island, they shipwreck, and they're trapped there. And they're having a hard time giving birth. The women are dying in childbirth. So the Egyptians build the statue of Tuarte, the goddess of birth. And maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't help. It probably doesn't help because Tuarte ain't there. So I think now that we know the Egyptians are there, I think it's very easy to assume the Egyptians built the temple. They probably even built the door that can summon the smoke monster. And assuming Jacob was around to help them, he probably gave them the power to bring back the dead, so that when Jacob is indeed murdered, the smoke monster can corrupt the water in the temple, and that's why when they bring back Saeed, he's already evil. So those are my two answers. Were they dead the entire time? No. Now, before I go on to answer this, I must say that I think the gimmick of flashbacks, flash forward, and flash sideways just needed to stop. For my money, it was just getting old hat. However, I think that if they, the writers, needed to keep them going, I would have liked to see flashbacks to other times on the island where we only hear about or see glimpses of. Now that said, the flashbacks this season were going to a time where the plane didn't crash on the island, and for some reason the island was underwater. Some people's lives were much different, like Sawyer was a cop, Miles was his partner, but others remained almost the same. Locke was still in a wheelchair. It was caused by a plane accident with his father, whom he was very close with. Hurley still won the lottery, but he had nothing but good luck in this timeline. The only character that knew something was wrong was Desmond, and for much of the season, he's going around trying to get the other survivors to remember their time on the island. The season ends where they all meet up at a church, and this is where Jack encounters his father, but this time it's his real father. And Christian tells Jack that this is a place that they've all created so they could find one another. That this is a place where they could finally put their issues to bed, and as Christian says, let go and move on. And back on the island, as Jack is dying, the show ends with a bright light welcoming everyone into the afterlife. Now for my money, I go back and forth between thinking this was indeed the real afterlife, where everyone finally gets a happy ending, but then I like to think that this is just Jack thinking it as he dies. His mind is creating this like a gift for giving his life for the island. But either way, no, they were not dead the whole time. There is no time in the afterlife, it's always been there, so I guess you could say they've been dead the whole time. But that's just a technicality. As Christian says, there's no time where they are. And as I've said before, everything that happened, happened. I don't understand why people can't grasp this, that it was the afterlife, that everything that happened on the island was true and real. The island was not purgatory, and they didn't all die in a plane crash. The show tells us many, many times what happened, happened. So I'm going to try the Herculean task of making sense from the smoke monster, Jacob, and whatever the island is. You ready? Okay. So what is the island? Well, for me, more or less, it's the equivalent of the Garden of Eden. At the center of the island, there is a bright light. It's the same light that is in every human being, and there must be a protector, not just of the island, but of the light. If the light goes out, then a great darkness and evil will spread. Think of it as Lost's version of the forbidden fruit. It must not be eaten, the light must not go out. So in some time we don't know, there was a woman that we only know of as Mother. Perhaps a way of the show's implying that this is the spirit of Mother Nature. That's just conjecture, mind you. There's a Roman ship that crashes onto the island, and a woman washes on shore. She gives birth to 2 babies. One's named Jacob, and the other one we never get the name of. The woman is killed by Mother before she can give the baby a name. So I guess we could just call him for now the baby in black, because, oddly enough, he's wrapped in black cloth. So Mother raises the 2 boys, and at every chance she denounces humanity and tells them that there is nothing outside of the island. She also appears to favor the boy in black more than she does Jacob, and this causes the 2 brothers to have issues. Mother tells them that she made it so the 2 of them can never kill one another. But there's nothing else said about that, just that one line. She gives us a line that sums up the show in general, that every question she answers will only bring up another question. She shows them the light at the center of the island and claims that one of them will need to make sure the light never goes out. The man in black, tired of living with his mother and her rule and the desperation to leave the island, goes off to live with the Romans that had survived the shipwreck. And for a while he lives with them, until one day Mother finds out that they are going to move the island with the donkey wheel. So she kills everyone in the village and destroys the donkey wheel. They never show us how she does it, and this is just a theory, but it is implied she herself is a smoke monster. The man in black kills his mother, and when Jacob finds out, he tosses the man in black into the bright light at the center of the island, thus creating the smoke monster. So the man in black lives, but he doesn't have a body. He cannot leave the island, and the only way for him to leave is if Jacob is killed. But the man in black cannot kill his brother personally. The two of them come up with plans to kill the other, and if the man in black leaves the island, there's going to be a great evil that will infect people. But the man in black just claims he wants to leave the island and go home. Maybe catch a show or go to Five Guys, who knows? The world's his oyster. Jacob finds people that he thinks will be good leaders, someone that can take the island after he dies, someone that needs the island as much as the island needs them. His candidates. As a failsafe, he brings Desmond to the island. The man in black starts corrupting people that Jacob brings to the island and manipulates Locke until he becomes leader of the others and uses that power to get to Jacob, where he then forces Ben, in his anger and hatred, to deal the final death blow onto Jacob. From there, it's up to our heroes, the remaining survivors, to stop the smoke monster. So there you have it. Those were my answers to some of the questions that people have about Lost. Now, am I saying that those were the definite answers? No. But maybe my thoughts and my words can be able to give you something to think about when you have your own little thought experiments about the show. I'm not saying that they're right, I'm not saying that they're wrong, and I'm sure that could have gone into much greater detail about a lot of things, but I just wanted you to have a little closure, some closure that maybe you didn't get when the show first aired. From here, we're going to go on to what I think are the true meanings of Lost. You ready? Okay, let's go. Before there was Lost, there was Twin Peaks, which attempted a long-term mystery. Instead of wrapping up every story by the end of the episode, the story carried over throughout the entirety of the show's run. Now, this might have been groundbreaking, but at the time, the audience wasn't ready for it, and Twin Peaks was canceled late in the second season. Then there was The X-Files, which tried to have a long-term mystery, but also mix it up with standalone episodes. And while the writing was top-notch in the beginning, and the acting was always incredible, the show just didn't have a strong enough direction, and it was clear by the end of its run. Personally, I prefer the standalone episodes because the overall mystery just didn't make any sense and very convoluted by the end of its run. But Lost, by the time it aired, the typical sci-fi show would contain a story by the end of the episode, with maybe a few parts of the episode dedicated to the current season story arc. That's if you're lucky. TV at the time was a consumable mystery. Everything wrapped up by the end of the episode to be forgotten and ready for the next week, for the next story. Then Lost came along, and J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof needed to create something that was going to change TV. They had to create something that was going to capture the attention of the audience and keep it. The meta story of Lost is the mystery. The smoke monster is literally the mystery of the show, and it changed TV until this very day. You don't believe me? The smoke monster literally kills the pilot in the pilot episode of the show. The smoke monster, the mystery, is literally destroying the typical pilot, and from this moment forward, the mystery is telling you, the viewer, that nothing is safe. The show is literally about the mystery, not the answers, and I think this is something that people might miss when they watch it. They don't see that the smoke monster is literally the unknown mystery of the show. It's always there. It's always lurking in the background and in the distance. What happens whenever there's a big answer on Lost? In the first season, when the survivors are about to bust open the hatch where you might get some answers, what happens? The smoke monster shows up, and it tells you what the true mystery is. Once the hatch implodes, an answer is shown. There's no more exploring of the hatch. So what happens? The smoke monster arrives and kills Mr. Echo. And once again, we are talking about the real mystery. We talk about what the smoke monster is, where it comes from. Once the others leave for the temple, and they leave Kate and Juliet, we have gotten a ton of answers. We've learned a lot about the others. What about Dharmaville? So what happens? The smoke monster chases them through the jungle. In the 4th season, the people come to the island from the freighter. They come to kill Ben. All the answers about who they are and what they're doing on the island are answered. And as we've seen before, the smoke monster shows up and takes back the plot. In season 5 and 6, the smoke monster wins. He takes over the plot of the show. Lost is his. He is the only mystery. The show is telling you that closure and answers aren't what we should be looking for in life. That it's the mystery where we find our meaning. That TV is better with a long-term mystery. That the shows where answers in each episode are given are quickly forgotten. But Lost, well, as I'm proving now, I'm still talking about Lost. I can sense you out there right now. You're still not sure, okay? What happens to a character when their backstory and their mystery are completely spilled out for us? They're killed. Once we learn everything there is to know about Boone, guess what? He's gone. Shannon, Mr. Echo, gone. When we learned everything there is to learn about Juliet, she's gone. Same thing with Sun and Jin. Once we see their entire story off the island, they're completely useless to the story and the overall mystery. Their mystery on the island is tied to their past. Once they have one explained to its fullest, then there's no use for them on the island. Now, I know this might sound a little silly, but think about it like this for just a moment, please. These characters are literally being explained to death. The show, Lost, is begging you to never stop looking for the mystery of life. Now, I don't think the writers of the show were taking this route when they created Lost, but they did know that the show needed a good mystery, that they needed something to drive the story and keep the intention of the viewers. Because what happens in life, like TV, when you don't have a little mystery? It gets boring, predictable, and stale. And what happened when the smoke monster killed the pilot? He made sure nothing was predictable from that moment forward. The second meaning of Lost is that of its big debate between fate and destiny and free will. It doesn't matter in the end, of course, because, in fact, nothing matters. If you're looking for some higher meaning or some higher power, then it's all pointless. There is no grand design, there is no higher power. I know it might sound a little bleak, but please just bear with me for a moment. Allow me to make my case. When Boone died, Locke says it's for a reason. What reason is that? I don't know. Why would the island demand Boone as a sacrifice? I mean, Locke didn't need to get into the hatch. Desmond could have gone on forever, typing the numbers every 108 minutes. Dr. Arch just blew the fuck up, out of nowhere. And why? To show us how dangerous TNT was? There's literally no reason for Dr. Arch to die. Alana, she was like a daughter to Jacob, to the point where she came to the island to avenge his death. And what happened? She was transporting TNT, and like Dr. Arch, she blew it up. Michael's daughter, Alex, she's murdered by Kimi. And for what? Jacob didn't even care. Michael blew up, and for what reason? To atone for his sins. And when he died, what happened? He became a ghost to walk around forever on the island. This happened time and time again for characters. Each one, in the grand scheme of things, were pointless. You might say it's about Jacob, but Jacob isn't a god. He might have been worshipped like he was one on the island, but the truth is he was just a man. The smoke monster, he isn't the devil. He isn't a god either. He's just a man that was completely and utterly evil. In the end, what they, the survivors, died for, and all the people on the island, was a feud between two brothers. One brother was so jealous because mother loved him more, and he didn't want to be alone on the island. The sad thing is that for a very long time, Jacob lived in the base of the four-toed statue, alone, away from the people that worshipped him. Now, he says that telling people right or wrong was pointless. They needed to make that decision on their own, and that's why he remained hidden all those years. However, Jacob could have lived with the others. He could have led his people by example. He could have inspired. But no, he remained in the four-toed statue. The man in black and Jacob both might have had powers, but they were born, they could bleed, and they died. And in the end, they were just flawed humans. People fighting and dying in their name, in the end, I think is just pointless, as it came down to just two petty brothers with a feud fighting one another for centuries. That's a pretty bleak thought, but what if I said just because there's no grand design doesn't mean there isn't a little bit of ray of hope in this? While what the people on the island did was pointless when in terms of Jacob and the man in black, I do think there is a meaning in the end. I don't think the island had a will or design either, but the island did need to be protected. The man in black did need to be stopped, not because some cosmic destiny, but because he was evil and stopping him was the right thing to do. All is not bleak in this, because in the final episode, Jack says something. Jack says everything matters. And I think of it like this. Everything that people do matter. See, there's no going back in time. There's no righting some wrongs, because as Lost said, what happened, happened. Some things are impossible to change. So what we do in the here and now, it matters. Even if there isn't an afterlife, it matters, because we're all part of the world. What we all do matter. If you put evil into the world, if you let the light inside of yourself go out, if you do bad things, that's going to have an effect. Your darkness will spread to others. You aren't a good person because Jacob wants you to be good. You're a good person. You protect the light because you're a good person, because it's the right thing to do. Look who becomes the protector of the island, Hugo. And what is he? Well, like Jacob, like Jack, Hurley is just a man. He's just a human being. However, he always tried to be positive. And on the island, he always tried to help people. He was kind, he was funny, he was a good person. And a good person protects the island because good people protect the light in the world. It isn't for some grand design, but because they want to do good. In the end, the meaning of Lost is very simple. What happened, happened. So do good things now, because we can't go back. And we don't know the future. The secret meaning of Lost is that there is no cosmic destiny. Destiny is what we, all of us, make of it. And if we keep the light going and strong, there's hope for everybody. While I was editing this video, I had another idea. So, in closing, I think there is another overall meaning. And I think the story is about love. The writers give people love, and the writers normally just rip it away in such a cruel and terrible way. Love drove many of the characters on the island, for the good and for the bad. Desmond and Penny, they did everything they could to be with one another again. Jack, as heartbroken as he was at times, would do anything for Kate because he loved her with all his heart. Even Ben, as misguided and disturbed as he might have been, he had strong feelings for Juliet. And yeah, it might have caused him to do some terrible things. I do think he honestly loved Juliet. However, when in the Sideways story, these characters don't have love. They're just as lost in the afterlife as they were on the island. So what brings them all together? What made it for them to be able to move on and to let go? Love. It wasn't until everyone had found what they loved that they were able to come together and put their lives what had happened before in the past. I think the writers want us to keep this in mind, to be able to look at our lives, to be able to cherish what we have, because like on the island, it can be taken away at a moment's notice. You could have everything you've ever thought you wanted, but then bam, your love falls down a hole and sets off a nuke in 1977, and you're teleported into the future. The truth of the matter is the show told us what this last meaning of Lost is, all the way back in Season 2. When Desmond had a flashback, he's sitting alone in the hatch. He wants to kill himself. He has a gun in his hand. But what stopped him? He reads a letter from Penny, where she says All that anyone needs to survive is someone to love them. And as painful as it is, he wanted to survive because she was out there. Desmond wouldn't take his life because he loved Penny. And if she loved him, that was all he needed to survive. Lost told you from season 2, no matter how terrible things can be, as long as there's one person in this world that loves you, you can make it through. I don't know about you, my dear friends, but that thought has gotten me through many a long night, and I thought I would just share it with you. What feels like ages ago now, I had mentioned that Lost had changed TV. And I said that it had been for the better, and of course, the worse. And it's true. Networks saw how popular those early seasons of Lost were. And even by the end of its run, it was still strong with the audiences. So every channel under the sun started to create their own clones of Lost. And some shows even changed their current course to try and expand their viewer base. So, I am going to go into these 3 shows that tried to pick up the mantle where Lost had left it. The good, the bad, and unfortunately, the other. I'm not going to go into the shows more than just a blurb and explain why it was either good or bad or really freaking bad. I won't be able to go into any of the storylines in depth, just enough for you to see the good, the bad, and whatever else came after Lost was a hit. So here we go with the good. The Leftovers, which was created by Damon Lindelof. It aired on HBO, and it's loosely adapted from the book of the same name. And The Leftovers just had one of the best hooks. At some random day, some inconsequential day, there is a sudden departure, where 2% of the world's population just vanish into thin air. The show picks up 3 years later, following the chief of police as he struggles with his own sanity while keeping the town from losing its mind. There's also a crazy cult that's popping up all over the country where people are leaving their old lives behind, all their worldly possessions, they have to smoke and move into a commune. I mean, it's just a masterclass of television. The following 2 seasons drop hints of a bigger lore and a deepening mystery, while still following the same characters more or less. Each season is its own standalone story about these characters living in a post-departed world. What I love about this show is that there's no final answer given. It seems that Damon Lindelof had learned from Lost and committed to not giving answers, allowing the mystery to be what keeps the show alive. This is pure art, and I can't recommend The Leftovers enough. If you do watch this show, don't expect a thrilling, action-packed sci-fi story, because The Leftovers is a slow burn, a character study of these people living in this world after an unthinkable event takes place. The bad, and this one's gonna hurt, because I honestly loved Battlestar Galactica's first season and a half, first 2 seasons. I mean, the acting was spectacular, the special effects were really cutting edge, I think, and it was a good start to retelling that classic television show. And while I don't know it, of course, I do feel like the Sci-Fi Channel saw the numbers that Lost was pulling in and wanted a little piece of that lore-heavy pie. They started bringing in prophecies and dead worlds and weird storylines, and that all would have been fine enough, but then Starbuck just vanishes for a good chunk of the show, and then it turns out that she's an angel, and then it turns out that there's other characters that have been working with a higher power. For what? I don't know. Maybe to get humanity to restart or something or other. Look, the ending's just a bad time. It's a letdown, plain and simple. Now, it's bad enough that for the last 4 seasons, the show had claimed that the Cylons, the show's antagonists, have had a plan. But in watching this train wreck of an ending, it's clear they did not. And to be frank, there's no reason for Ron Moore to start bringing in angels and gods and prophecies, because it wasn't needed. This isn't Star Wars. This is a gritty, realistic, I hate to say realistic, but realistic space opera. But by the end of the show, it's just felt aimless and pointless. They had a good thing going, but I think they let their need to be clever, their need to shock the audiences and keep them guessing, derail what could have been a classic television show. on par with, or at least maybe even rivaling, the original. But this show will go down as one of TV's biggest letdowns. And now we arrive at the ugly. We're going to talk about The Event, a show so obscure that I could barely find enough clips to cover this audio track. So, you might be asking me, what was The Event? No clue, because this was an event at some point in time or something in the future, and they only give us hints to it. The show had one interesting idea, just one, that the president had learned there were aliens being held in a concentration camp in Antarctica, and the rest of the government was trying to keep him from telling the rest of the world. The other plot line, if you could call it a plot line, was that of Jason Ritter, who was a guy that was going to ask his girlfriend to marry him, and one contrived, boring plot thread leads to another, and she vanishes, and he starts to uncover what the conspiracy is. The show was using flashbacks, and unlike Lost, they didn't stick to the character-centric episodes. And as you can guess, since I haven't mentioned The Event, it is not nowhere ever seen in the first season. The plan was to build up to this event, but when you call your show The Event, you need to show the event. That's like if Lost was just a bunch of people farting around their normal lives for the first season. They do that a lot. People would start to question what the hell the title of Lost is. This is the problem that a lot of TV shows found. They were just trying to be too clever for their own good, and it so often backfired. I think The Event is just the worst case in this situation. It was terrible. The show's final episodes had the flashbacks cut out, and of course, this abortion of fiction was finally, gracefully canceled. So there you have it. Lost has had some really good impact on television, and in fact, it's had some questionable impact on television. I'm just going to stop talking about The Event because it's just pissing me off all over again. I do think those final 3 seasons of Lost showed television networks that you can tell a tighter story in less episodes. It showed that there is a desire for grand stories and that the viewer's attention span will be kept if the story and the characters are done well enough. Look, there's never going to be another Lost, and Lost wasn't trying to be another Twin Peaks. It was just trying to tell its own good story. It reminds me of when people would say there's never going to be another Michael Jordan. And in fact, there's never been another Michael Jordan. There's LeBron James, and he was LeBron James. And the next guy, he's not going to be the next LeBron James. He's just going to be whoever the next guy is. The next Lost is just going to be whatever that show is. For a time, it was Game of Thrones. And for a while, every show was trying to be the next Game of Thrones. The key is to just make a good story, to allow it to stand on its own. And if you're lucky, without even trying, you might have a show that's going to change the game. But once you force it, there's a good chance you're going to be the next event. So I wanted to touch on a few bits and bobs, a couple of gubbins here and there, stuff that I would have liked to talk about, but maybe just didn't fit in any other section. So I'm just going to shoehorn them in here and hope for the best. Now, if you're like me, you've watched Lost a couple of times. So many times that you might be bored with the thought of another watch through. I may have the solution. What's the solution, you ask? What's that? You didn't ask? Tough. There's a fan edit of Lost that can be found on certain corners of Facebook. It's called Chronologically Lost. The premise of this fan edit is that the entire show is cut down and put into its proper chronological order, hence the title. It starts from the unknown time when Jacob and the Man in Black are born on the island, and from there, it goes in chronological order. It brings a very fresh feel to the show. I will say, however, that there's a long stretch of these episodes that do not take place on the island, as a large portion of this cut is mainly just the flashbacks. Still, I find it incredibly interesting and a really different way to go through another watch of this show. I recommend it to anyone who's a massive Lostie. Here's some things that exist. There were a couple of novels based in the world of Lost. One was called Bad Twin. It was written by an author named Gary Troop, who in the lore of Lost was on the plane that crashed on the island. his book was published once 815 vanished. Overall, it's unremarkable because I read it, and aside from a few lines, I don't remember much of anything. Of course, I read it 10 years ago, and in fact, I think it was out of canon the moment it hit the shelves. It's about a PI and his evil twin brother. There's mentions of the Hanzo Foundation, the Widmore family, and a mention of a flight attendant named Cindy, who may or may not be a very, very, very minor character from the show. Also, there are 2 other paperbacks that were released. Both took place on the island, but both dealt again with characters we've never seen on the show. Only these 2 novels, Secret Identity and Endangered Species. There were cameos from other characters from the show, and the idea was to have an ongoing shared universe in the books. But when the show took off and went off, let's say, some questionable directions, the book series ended. Also, the sales were probably really piss poor. I can hear you now. But Annie, we want a more interactive, bizarre experience with Lost. Believe it or not, I have just the thing for you. The Lost video game. You don't believe me? Oh, this exists, I promise. And I was so excited to play this game when it first came out. But, much like all other media, it was about a character that we don't see on the show. Hell, I can't even remember my dude's name. You travel around the island, you see some locations, you get involved in the story peripheral, and it's just bad. The voice actors didn't come back, the plot was stupid, it just didn't fit in with the rest of the show at all. Now, this was before the show went into the 4th season, and if I recall, the writers of the show had no interest in doing anything with this game. Despite claims that this was going to give minor answers, it did not. As with any media that Lost ever produced, there were no answers. I even recall doing a puzzle with my ex-wife. We had gotten it from Five Below, and we only bought it because it says right on the box, possible new hints and answers. But guess what? It didn't give crap. Now, if you please allow me to talk to you for a moment, I'd like to talk about the music of Lost. And if you're watching this on YouTube, which I'm assuming you are, then I have been lucky that this video wasn't blocked. So I don't think I can show you any examples of the music that has been on this show. But rest assured, the soundtrack to this wonderful TV show is superb and fantastic. And when I listen to it, I can just picture the scene at hand with such perfect clarity. All of the music has been composed by Michael Giacchino, and I must admit that I personally think this is the best soundtrack to any media I have watched. While there are many shows and movies that have good themes or a song here and there, like True Detective has an amazing opening. So does Banshee. But honestly, I don't think I could tell you much about the music of these shows. However, Lost, all these years, still sticks with me to this very day. And some of the tracks just have the ability to bring a wealth of emotions out of me. And trust me, if you know me, I have no emotions. People say I'm dead inside. Whenever I go on a hike, I just like to put the music on, just get out there lost in nature, so to speak, for a couple of hours, and I allow the music to be my soundtrack to my own adventure. As I said, I can't show you just how fantastic these tracks are, but the music is a large part of any show, really. Many of these powerful scenes that I have talked about and described, they have been captured in my heart and soul, but it's done with the music, this beautiful music playing in the background. I wish I could put into words how this music has really touched me, but alas, I am not a music critic, so I can't clearly explain to you why exactly this soundtrack is so amazing. It's a little beyond my abilities, but I can only say that I think this show has indeed the perfect soundtrack. Now, my dear friends, it's time to talk about a reboot, because like anything with the possibility to make money off nostalgia, I think there's a very good chance that we will see a reboot of Lost in the future. And to be honest, I don't think I would be upset by it. I just don't want Carl Hughes and Damon Lindelof to come back. Nothing against them, they're very talented writers, but they had their chance, they had their time, and they told their story to completion. I think it would be better for some fresh eyes with a new take on the world of Lost. Also, what I don't want is for a complete remake of the show. Nor do I want Lost to just try and repeat the same exact ideas and themes. I hope they try something new. But all that said, I might be a hypocrite, but I would like for them to go back to this island or another island. Because for me, I like that location. I like that aesthetic. And I feel there have to be other places like the original island all over the earth. It would just have to be different enough with a good enough story to justify it existing. And of course, really good, well-written characters. And I think you could even bring back some old characters from the previous show. We know Hugo doesn't age since he's protector of the island. Maybe he needs to go to this new place for some reason. Look, even if the remake comes out and it sucks, it's probably going to suck. It wouldn't ruin anything for me. I think a lot of people allow reboots, sequels, and remakes to ruin their favorite media. In the end, you still have your original media. Unless it's owned by George Lucas. Then it's probably going to get a super really cool, neat deluxe edition, and the one you like is going to be locked into some kind of vault somewhere, and the only edition you're going to be able to see is some horrible Jabba the Hutt walking along with Han Solo, and it's going to look terrible, and you're going to be really unhappy with it, and you're just going to beg for your original edition. You're going to have to go into your basement and pull out the old VHSs that have been taken from you. Look, I'm getting really upset. The point is, unless it's Star Wars, you're going to have your original 6 seasons of Lost. So no matter how bad that reboot could be, you'll always have that original story to go back to. So, how do I feel going back and rewatching Lost? And now talking about it until I'm blue in the face. Have I changed? Have my feelings for the show changed? I look back and I still have fond memories of sitting in my first apartment with my ex-wife every week just glued to the TV. It was something we both shared, we both enjoyed. And I still think about those times and smile. My friends, nothing lasts forever. But we did the best we could with what we had. And despite what happened, it happened. But those memories I have with her watching Lost still bring me a comfort and a nostalgia. It's been almost 12 years since Lost ended. And in that time, I've gotten clean and sober. I've finally had my mental illness diagnosed. And despite dealing with it day in and day out and how hard that can be, I've kept going. There are nights that I have a hard time getting to the morning, more often than I'd like, but I just keep going, keep moving forward. I have an amazing partner, my mistress, and she has given me things that I never thought I could have or that I deserved. I have a bond with her that I cherish with all my heart. And on those nights when I'm racing and I'm pacing, I remember that I have my constant, and she's out there. That with the sun will come a new day to serve her. In 2016, I came out as transgender, and through my transition, I've seen just how strong of a person I truly am. While my transition hasn't always gone smoothly, and I have faced some terrible bigotry, I persist, and I keep going forward, because that is who I am. It's who I'm meant to be. I still have struggles with self-harm and my mental disability, but I do my best not to let it control me. And I do what I can to remain busy, like making 2-hour-plus YouTube videos on TV shows. The loss of my brother still hurts. I think of him so often. I miss him very much, and it still wounds my soul knowing that he was taken from me. In 2019, I bought a house, and it's been hard but amazing. In the height of COVID in the last year and a half, I was driving medical supplies to the hospital, and I started a small food pantry here in town. For the most part, I've grown, or I hope that I've grown a great deal. I have changed a great deal in the last 10 years. And now, rewatching the show again, I see it in a different light. Before I went back and rewatched, I just thought Lost was a bleak show about misplaced faith and more or less meeting your heroes. Because like I said, Jacob, for all his grandstanding, was just a man. Kind of a letdown. Now I see it for what it's meant to be. It's a show about making connections, about owning up to the things you've done and confronting the things that have caused you pain. It's about keeping the light you have alive every single day. It's about cherishing the people in your life. This show is always going to be important to me. It's always going to mean so much to me. And while I'm sure I didn't convince everyone, hell, maybe I didn't convince anyone that this show is a masterclass in television. At least 2 times in my life where things have been the darkest, I've had Lost as a comfort, and for that, I can't help but think it's special. One of the core themes I think Lost has is what the characters brought to the island. And as they grew, it became what they took and what they learned from the island. Maybe viewing it is the same way. Maybe it's what you bring to the show when you watch it. And maybe when you finish it, at least for me, it's about what you had learned, what you had gotten from it. Some fiction and some art just touches you. It just reaches into your chest and hits you in the heart where the light of all people live. And for me, that's what this show is. Art, there's no explaining it. It's just how you react to it. There's no accounting for it. It's what the show invokes in you. And for me, it invoked a great deal. I look back and have nothing but fond memories of my times viewing this show and the person that I first started watching it with. Maybe the last thing I would like to say is that this show was right about one thing. Sometimes you just need to let go and move on. So maybe you can find some peace inside and believe in yourself. My friends, I hope we can all do that someday. So, in closing, Lost. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's not bad. I guess I could have saved us all a lot of time and just said that in the beginning of the video. Shit.